What are some bands, for one reason or another, that get way too much hate that I don't necessarily think is entirely justified? I would not mind doing a follow-up video about bands that I think get hated for rational and good reasons, and obviously you're entitled to your own opinion. But in this video, what I wanted to go over is some bands that I think get hated for some illogical reasons, or ones that are either hypocritical or just a little bit silly and petty. Mind you, quite a few of these bands aren't even bands that I necessarily frequent that often. I can just observe from afar and realize that people are a little weird with how they hate them. And you can let me know down in the comment section below not only your opinions on this list, but the bands that you personally think are overhated for one reason or another, the ones that get a lot of critique that you don't think necessarily deserve it. Starting off with probably the band that I listen to the least but notice the most of, Cradle of Filth. And most of the time I feel like the major points that people critique Cradle of Filth for is that they are like baby's first black metal, that they are called black metal but they're poser black metal, that if you listen to them that you're not true cult, that you are just listening to commercially viable watered down black metal. And I think that's stupid, because any genre is always going to have bands that are maybe a bit more well produced, a bit more commercially viable. And a lot of people also just don't really like Danny as a vocalist, think that he's a little corny, a little cringy and campy, but that's kind of their whole aesthetic. And regardless of if you like Cradle of Filth or not, they're a great introductory band that can get people into black metal that might end up liking the underground stuff. So regardless of if you think they are not true black metal or that they're like a poser band, I just think that's kind of silly. A band that doesn't get nearly as much hate as they once did, but there was a time that you could not go anywhere without hearing so much controversy surrounding this band, Deafheaven. Deafheaven were part of a couple of bands, a select few bands in the 2010s that completely redefined and reshaped how black metal was approached. In the 2000s, you had projects like Alcest and to some degree Wolves in the Throne Room that were taking different elements from shoegaze that would lay the groundwork for a subgenre that would later be known as blackgaze, one of the most controversial and polarizing and widely discussed genres of metal, period. It was shoegaze music being infused with black metal music. Very pristine, very shiny, very pretty, meticulously put together, and not nearly as primordial and raw and shrill and brittle as most black metal had become like known for up until that point. And there was not a single band even close to the same degree of polarization that Deafheaven attracted. People saying that they were ruining black metal. Most of the time this would come from purists and gatekeepers who didn't want to see any influence be brought into the fold, or people thinking that it was getting a lot of normies into black metal and extreme metal by making it more commercially viable and specifically digestible for a wider audience, because the production and the general tempo of it was more familiar and digestible compared to how extreme and unwelcoming and cold a lot of black metal had been up until that point. And it goes hand in hand with people that just don't particularly think that any American black metal was worthy or worthwhile, just thinking that Americans ruined black metal and that the only true way to be a black metal project was either if you were an American band that worshipped the European scene, or if you were a European band in general. And in the mid to late 2010s, obviously it's died down a lot, but Deafheaven were one of the most hot button talking points in the black metal world for what they were doing for the subgenre, and just the influx and the publications and reviewers that were giving attention and acclaim to them. It felt like it was changing the tempo and rhythm of black metal. It was the zeitgeist. It was the cultural moment in black metal, and Sunbather was one of the most monumental, critically acclaimed, and talked about and listened to extreme metal records of the 2010s, and to this day got so many people into the genre that would have never been privy to it otherwise. And similar to Cradle of Filth, I think that that can't be a bad thing to have gateway bands that can get you into other forms of black metal and extreme music. A band that I don't necessarily understand the hype for is Ghost. Now, obviously there are two sides of the coin. There are the metalheads that don't like Ghost, and then there's like the Christian Panic people who don't like Ghost. I've talked at length about how Ghost gets a lot of shit, satanic panic, like the old days from like Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, and everyone that's like, you know, an evangelical and gets their panties in a bunch anytime they feel like anything is remotely anti-religious, even if it is in like the funny way or the, you know, ironic way. They're gonna throw a hissy fit. And obviously, I think that's stupid. I've talked about it at length. Coming from a Christian perspective, I think that satanic panic for any type of music is usually pretty damn unfounded, pretty stupid, pretty nonsensical, and doesn't really have any roots in reality most of the time. And it shows the lack of education and research on the topics that these people like to cast doubt and judgment on. But then you have a lot of people who, kind of similar to how Deafheaven made people feel like it was like a poser metal band, there's a lot of people that don't like Ghost's revival of old school rock and metal, that don't think they're a metal band, that think they're like an old school hard rock band, that think they're cheap and playing to a bunch of cliches and tropes from the past and using that to be commercially viable, which you're not necessarily that far from the truth, but that's exactly what they are intending to do. They're reincarnating these old styles of hard rock and blues rock and heavy metal and glam metal music, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're not portraying themselves as anything else. That is the aesthetic they're going for, that is the sound they are going for, and I don't necessarily understand why people would be critiquing that. Now, you can have critiques of them as a band, because I know there have been things in regards to the background of the band that are a little controversial and questionable ethically a lot of times, but I think Ghost is catchy. I think they write some very catchy music, and I think when it comes to copycat and imitation bands of old styles, it can be very hit or miss, and I think more often than not, Ghost hits the mark more than they miss. The next band I'm going to be talking about is Annihilator, and this is a project that I have talked about at length. I made an entire video, you can watch it if you want, called The Importance of Annihilator, and like most 99% of the comments are like, holy shit, you are so right, and it's because Annihilator revolutionized deathcore music. Production-wise, lyrically, vocally, they completely changed the game, and you are still seeing the effects that Annihilator did for extreme music from a deathcore and metalcore perspective. And obviously, I have my own critiques of the loudness war and the obsession with breakdowns and focusing songs around the breakdowns, but that is less of Annihilator's fault, because I think they did it in a very creative and unique way, I'll go on the record saying that, and more of an issue of the bands that tried to copy them, but took all of the worst influences and bare minimum influences and tried to cast a bunch of hatred on it. There was nothing like Annihilator, and another reason that people don't like them is they're goofy, they're silly, they don't take it too seriously, and you could say that Electric Callboy gets a lot of hate for similar reasons. I think that some levity in metal is perfectly fine. You need some sort of levity to break the tension, and you need bands that are willing to be a little whimsical and joyous and goofy and silly and on the nose. There have been so many extreme metal and death metal bands since the 80s, since the 90s, that have been a little tongue-in-cheek, so I don't know why Annihilator garnered so much hate. And I kind of do know it's because deathcore garners a lot of hate, and people are always going to have their panties in a bunch when it comes to deathcore, because it's not real metal, which obviously is so fucking stupid. Deathcore is obviously real metal. But the influence that Annihilator had and has and is going to have for decades to come for deathcore, laying the framework for projects like Lorna Shore and Mental Cruelty and Worm Shepherd and so many other deathcore bands and slam bands and metalcore bands that took influence from how they wrote their music and produced their music. We still don't know the full effect of what it's going to be, so yeah, I think Annihilator doesn't really deserve the hate. This may be a little bit of a controversial take. This is a project I don't really listen to that much, but I think a lot of the reasons people don't like them is kind of silly. Sleep Token. Now, I have made multiple videos deep diving into the rise of Sleep Token and why I think people dislike Sleep Token, and I might make an updated video on them soon, but I don't necessarily think a lot of the hate is justified. Most people think that Sleep Token feel very manufactured and engineered and cringy and take their influences in a dumb way. And playing devil's advocate, I understand where you're coming from. And it seems like to me more of the hatred is directed towards the fan base as opposed to Sleep Token themselves, simply because the fan base treats them like they are the second coming of Christ in terms of music, that it is literally the best music ever made. It's the most ingenious music ever made, which that is not the case. Sleep Token take the most common denominator influences from all of their music. They just package them in a way that feels unique, because you don't necessarily hear like trap and R&B and electronic and all these different influences and gent, metalcore and heavy metal, alternative metal being influenced in the same way and put in the witch's cauldron and stirred around. It can feel unique for people that don't have knowledge of the genres that they are borrowing from. Sleep Token just kind of has a lot of things rooting against them. People not liking how much TikTok played a role in it and Twitter played a role in it. People not liking their influences, thinking that they're very basic, thinking that they're getting normies into music, and obviously anytime a band gets really popular, it's gonna come with a lot of stigma from the metal and rock community. I just made a video about, like, is selling out a thing? I think Sleep Token are pretty basic. I think Sleep Token aren't nearly as unique as a lot of people portray them as, but I think a lot of their music is pretty damn inoffensive, and that's my opinion on it. The next band I'm gonna be talking about is Avenge Sevenfold, and I don't listen to a lot of Avenge Sevenfold. I like a lot of their early releases. I grew up on that shit. I grew up on early alt metal and new metal and shit like that from like the 2000s and Halo montages and World of Warcraft machinima. So I have my fair share of Avenge Sevenfold knowledge. I own Avenge Sevenfold, a lot of their early stuff. You can think that the members are a little douchebaggy or that their music is cringy. I do think it's kind of campy. I do think there's something to be said about the cringiness to be like, "Hail to the king, you're fucking nightmare." The lyrics are a little stupid, I will give you that, but I will say I have a ton of respect for Avenged Sevenfold. I don't think all of their eras have necessarily panned out, but with so many metal bands scared to experiment, scared to go in new directions, scared to take their sound in any new direction whatsoever to do anything original, yeah, I have a lot of respect and admiration for Avenged Sevenfold, being able to completely redefine their style and sound every single record, and even if not all of it is going to be my cup of tea, I wasn't a big fan of their last couple of records, I respect so much a band with the platform and voice that Avenged Sevenfold have, the sheer reputation and name attached to them, being willing to go out of their comfort zone every single record. I think that is fucking awesome and phenomenal, even if I don't like it a lot of times. The next two bands I'm going to do sort of a double whammy. I'm going to say Slipknot and Limp Biscuit. Two of the biggest nu metal bands that I think get a lot of weird shit, and a lot of it comes down to people not liking Corey Taylor and specifically not liking Fred Durst. I get it, Fred Durst is a douchebag, indeed, I will tip the hat to you on that, I will give you that. Corey Taylor definitely has his problems, you can say whatever you want about him, I definitely think he's pretty flawed, but Corey Taylor wears that on his sleeve, he writes a lot of music about it, and honestly, the cringe that a lot of people say they have and not liking nu metal, I think is a little unfounded, because do you know how much shitty nu metal music and alt metal music there is out there? If you think Slipknot and specifically Limp Bizkit are the cringiest to come out of like the rap rock infused alt metal scenes, like grungy scenes, you clearly are privileged enough to not have heard the pounds of shitty Korn worshippers and Coal Chamber worshippers that took like the vocals of Pearl Jam and put them in the worst type of alt metal and nu metal you've ever heard. I think Slipknot and Limp Bizkit have a lot of classic records under their belt, and I don't care what anyone says or how pretentious you might be, records like Iowa or Self-Titled by Slipknot or even some of their recent releases, and of course like Chocolate Starfish from Limp Bizkit, they're fucking iconic, they're catchy, they're timeless, they shape generations, and if your issues are just about the people, I get that, I understand that, but you can kind of separate that sometimes, and if it's about the music itself, I don't think you realize that they make some of the best nu metal music in the grand scheme of things that you're gonna get, and unless you just don't like nu metal and alt metal as a whole, as a concept, I don't think you have much room to talk. I want to talk about one of my favorite bands being Breaking Benjamin. I love Breaking Benjamin. I've talked so much how much I love Breaking Benjamin. I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, but with the recent release of Awaken, I thought it'd be a pretty cool idea for me to be able to talk a little bit about them. Breaking Benjamin gets shit for their consistency. They never change their style. They never change their sound. And the only reason that I think this is silly, it's for a reason I said at the start, hypocrisy. Do you know how many metal bands get praised at the altar of and never change their style? Sometimes it's good to have a band that scratches a certain itch that no one sounds like, and you can't tell me that if you don't hear the opening chords or Ben's vocals on a Breaking Benjamin song, you immediately know it's a Breaking Benjamin song. There is no one that just sounds like them identically. Although Motionless in White certainly have tried, they really have tried in recent memory. Consistency isn't necessarily a bad thing, and if you are scratching a certain itch or playing to your fan base, I think that's fine. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel if it's not broken and if you're really damn good at what you do. And of course you can dislike it, but me personally, I will always eat that shit up on a silver platter unapologetically, and I will make no excuses about it. I will show no fucking remorse for my Breaking Benjamin love. No remorse. But what are your guys' opinions of this topic? You can let me know down in the comment section below your opinions on this list. If you agree or disagree, there is no wrong answer with my takes and my picks, as well as what are your opinions and takes on bands that you think garner a lot of hate, no matter the subgenre. It doesn't even have to be metal or rock, that you don't necessarily understand. You can let me know down in the comment section below. I can't wait to hear it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.